Hello everyone, this is Shonko and welcome to chapter 7 of the Spring tutorial for beginners. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe, and when you subscribe, please turn on all notifications so that you never miss a video on this channel. So in the previous chapter, we talked about some of the important Spring core annotations and saw a demo for each of them. And in this chapter, we're going to learn about the Spring MVC module and see a demo to understand how Spring MVC works, right? So here what you see is the basic architecture diagram of Spring MVC. When an HTTP request comes in, it is intercepted by the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet goes to the handler mapping to determine which controller it should go to, and from the handler mapping it goes to the controller and fetches the response, and then it goes to the view resolver to see if a view is attached to the request or not. If a view is attached to the request, view is basically a user interface, right? And if a view is attached to the request, it goes to the view and renders the view, right? So this is the basic architecture diagram for the Spring MVC module. Now let's take a look at a demo. So for the demo, I've already created this project, Spring MVC, and first we're going to run this and see how it works. And then we're going to see the various components that are involved or that make up this application, right? So I'm going to say run as Spring Boot app. Okay, so our application is up and running, and it is running on port 8283, right? So let's open up our browser and see how our application works. So I'm going to say localhost 8283, right? Okay, so when we hit localhost 8283, we see this login page, right? We have this login page here. Now we have a database at the backend. We are using an Oracle database at the backend. So let's take a look at the table that is attached or that is tied to this application, that is tied to the user that we're trying to, with which we are trying to log in, or which we are trying to register to our application. So that belongs to the profile user table. So let's start from okay, right now we don't have any user inside our database. We can see we have these columns in our table, profile user. So we have username, password, first name and last name, right? So let's try to register our user. So I'd say sign up, and here I would need to put the username. So I would say test underscore user name, and password I would say password, right? And first name I would say test first name, or let's say test underscore first underscore name, and last name I would say test underscore last underscore name, and I would click on register. So we have a successful registration for test first name, right? And let's go back to our database and see what records we have now inside our profile user table. So we have this entry in our profile user table: test username, password, test first name and test last name, right? Now let's try to log into our application. So the username is test username, right? So I'll just copy this and I'll paste it here. And the password for the first time, I'll just give some random password which is incorrect. So I'll just type in anything and I'll click on login. So we get this message, username or password is incorrect. Let's go to login page and let's try using the correct password and see what happens. So I'm gonna say password and I'm gonna click on login. So we can see we have this landing page, right? When we successfully log into the application, we are taken to this landing page, right? And let's click on logout. And once we click on logout, we again go back to the login page, right? Now let's understand how this application works. And let's see the components inside this application. So this is the application that we just ran, and let's first take a look at the dependencies inside this application. Alright, so for the dependencies we have Spring Boot Starter, Spring Boot Starter Test. So this is for the core dependencies of Spring, right? And then we have Spring Boot Starter Web. So this would make our application a Spring Web application, and this would enable the MVC module of Spring. And then we have Spring Boot Dev Tools. So every time we make a save, the server is going to restart and it is going to take in the changes. Then we have OJDBC, so that is for connecting to the database, the Oracle database that we are using as our backend. And then we have Spring Boot Starter Data JPA, so that provides us the persistence layer at the application end, and we're going to learn more about Spring Data JPA in our future in our future modules or in our future chapters. And we're not going to dig deep into Spring Data JPA as of now. And then we have Spring Boot Starter Time Leaf, so that's going to provide us the template for our user interface, right? So these are the dependencies for our project, and let's take a look at the classes that we have inside our project. So we have the entry point for our application here, which has the main method inside it, and we have the Spring Boot annotation, Spring Boot application annotation here on top of this class. And inside the controller, inside the controller package, we have this user controller class, which basically serves as a controller. So if we go back to our architecture diagram, this is where we are right now, at the controller, right? And we have this user service auto wired here. So user service is again an interface, and we are trying to inject a bean of type user service into this variable user service, right? And then we have our mappings, our request mappings here. So we have the get mapping here for our URL for this localhost 8283. So basically this request handler serves as the mapping for this URL localhost 8283, right? And then we have the /register mapping here. So once we click on sign up, we are taken to this /register endpoint, right? So that is basically mapped here, and here we are returning a new user attribute and returning the registration page. So if we go to our resources and go inside templates, we have this registration.xml, right? So this page holds the code for this interface, for rendering this user interface, right? And so this is our registration.html page, which takes us to the registration page, right? And then we have this save endpoint. So once we register ourselves, so let's say test user2, and let's say password is pwd123, that's it, and first name is test1 and last name is last1. And once we click on register, we are taken to the save endpoint, right? It says successful registration for test1. And if we go back to our database and run this command again, we see we have our second user registered or updated in our database, right? Added to our database, right? So that is the save endpoint. And then we have the fetch endpoint. So when we try to log in, when we try to log into our application, if we go back to the login page, right? If we go back to the login page and try to log in to our application, I put in pwd123 and try to log in. We are taken to the fetch endpoint, right, which takes us to the landing page of the application. And here we can see the first name of the user, welcome message with the first name of the user, right? And this is basically the landing page of our application. And so if there's a successful login, then we are taken to the welcome page, which is basically this welcome.html that holds our code for the landing page, right? No, sorry, if we do a successful login, then we are taken to the landing page. Else we are taken to the welcome page, which gives us the message that, okay, so I'll just try to log out. And I'll try to put in some random username and password which is not correct, and then I'll click on login. So if it is an unsuccessful login attempt, then will be shown this message, username or password is incorrect, and go back to login page, right? So apart from the controller, we have the DAO layer, which is used to create a repository, and this extends the JPA repository. So we're going to talk about this at some later point of time, and we're going to have a separate chapter for dealing with Spring Data JPA, where I would explain how Spring Data JPA works. So for the time being, let's just try to understand. Let's just say that this is used to fetch data from database. This is called a query method, and Spring provides an implementation of this method. And we need not write an implementation or we need not write an implementing class for this interface, and the implementation would be provided by Spring, right? And then we have the model, which is basically the user that we see inside our database. So we have the username, password, first name and last name, right? And these are basically the attributes inside this class: username, password, first name and last name. and this is the entity class, and we're going to talk about the entity class and these annotations ID and column in the chapter when we deal with Spring Data JPA, where we talk about Spring Data JPA, and we'll see how these work in details in that chapter, right? And then we have the service layer. So the service layer basically uses a repository to call the specific methods for fetching the data, for fetching the user, or for saving the user, and for deleting user and other stuff, right? And apart from this, we have this templates folder inside our source main resources folder, right, which holds the pages, the HTML pages, and then we have this static folder which holds the CSS and the images for our application, and then we have this application.properties file which holds the configurations for our data source, or for connecting to database, right, for connecting to our database, right? So that is basically it for this application. And in a real-time project, we want to separate the user interface from the various services such as login service and other stuff. So since this is just a demo, I have put everything in the same place, everything inside the same project, but in a real-time project we'll be separating the user interface layer from the different services that we will be dealing with, such as the login service and other stuff, right? And talking about the data flow, when we hit the URL, when we hit this URL, or when we hit any action, when we do any action on this user interface, the control comes inside any one of these request mappers. So, and these mappers internally call the service layer, and the service layer internally calls the DAO layer, and the DAO layer is responsible for fetching data from the database. And then once we return this, once we return a result from this method, it goes to the view resolver, and the view resolver is responsible for rendering the view and showing it to the user. So that is basically what we have seen in the architecture diagram at the beginning of the chapter, right? So that is basically it for this chapter, and in the next chapter we're gonna build an API using Spring MVC module, and stay tuned for chapter 8. Thanks for watching.